Aloha and welcome everybody here to another wonderful Soul Talk. I'm so excited. I have a wonderful guest again here, the wonderful Gwendolyn Jones. I love the name. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited for everything that we're going to talk about. But first, a short introduction. Gwendolyn Jones is a notable neurodivergent who works as a neurodivergent, affirmative, and GSRD positive therapist, coach, mentor, and corporate speaker. Gwen had worked for 25 years supporting those who live a life that is so not typical. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, me too. So maybe for starters, because that's one of the words that I don't know, what is GSRD? Positive.
So GSRD stands for gender, sex, and relationship diversity. So I'm trained as a sex and relationship therapist, and a big part of that is because I like to show up in the queer community as an ally, and I do a lot of therapy in that space. But we have LGBTQIA plus, and as professionals, the community, we're kind of wanting to be more inclusive as opposed to more divisive. So we say gender, sex, and relationship diversity. To say however you want to put a letter to it, or even if you don't want to put a letter to it, we're here to support you.
Oh, I love that so much because I mean that's the thing about this whole movement. I feel it's to include everybody, no matter how or whatever they identify or feel like wanting to be. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for sharing that. So in your own words, like how did you get to that point? Like how did you find out who you are, and then how did you become, someone who supports neurodivergent people?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I always grew up knowing that and hearing people say something's wrong with that girl, because I was raised in a very strong religious household. I was raised in the South for most of my life, so girls are supposed to be a certain way, and I couldn't be that polka dot dress wearing, bow in your hair, yes or no sir girl if I try. And I did try, and I want to put it out there, I really tried to be normal, whatever that is. And it just didn't show up for me ever. And so I constantly grew up with this sense of, why is life so much easier for everybody else? Why is it so much more difficult for me? So when I went to university, I'm also classified as intellectually gifted and talented, which just means I'm good at school. And so despite my neurodivergence, I was able to make it to school with absolutely no support in that area. And so where do we all go? We all go to psychology because we want to figure out what's going on in my head, right? And I happened to be working with somebody who happened to be working in neurodivergence. And I came into work one day and she's like, "When have you not had your meds today?" And I was like, And she's like, "No, really, have you not had your meds today? Like, what's going on with you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Oh, sweetie, like, surely you know you're ADHD." And I'm like, "What?" And I'd been working on ADHD, doing research on this, and didn't, because back in 2000, back when I was diagnosed, it was naughty boys who threw chairs and got into fights and couldn't sit still. And the fact that I was diagnosed in 2000 as a woman lets you know kind of how high my needs were for support, because most women wouldn't have been, but I had a hyperactive mind and a hyperactive body and high levels of impulsivity. And it changed my life. It really, really changed my life, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, all these other labels that I've been given my whole life of not meeting my potential, being lazy, being away with the fairies, being not right, being all this different stuff. It's like the only label that ever helped me was ADHD.
Mm.
Yeah.
I completely feel you on that end because I always said for me, I'm glad I was born earlier because otherwise I probably would have been pumped in with medication. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I'll be honest about it. Like, I take medication. I don't think everybody needs medication. I know that's a go-to for a lot of people who get diagnosis. For me, it helps me show up. And when I don't take it, like when I was pregnant or things like that, like it really makes a huge difference. But I think the idea that meds are a bad thing isn't good, but also meds are a good thing is not good either. It's like meds work for some people. And everybody who's ADHD doesn't need meds any more than everybody who's depressed needs meds, but some people do.
No,
So,
no, so sorry. Yeah, I didn't want to say it in that way because I just had because one of my cousins who's 10 years younger than me, he was diagnosed
uh,
with ADHD, but I don't know what they did wrong with his medication, but he was just, he was one of those kids that sort of like their light went off. like they
Oh,
were like he was just, you know, tired, even more late, you know, that
yeah.
the whole, okay, he's not doing anything. But I mean, come on, now the teachers are happy because he's not bothering them in school.
Yeah. And
So
that's the thing, like, am I medicating the parents and the teachers, or am I medicating this kid? You know,
exactly.
and so like I said, I didn't start medication until I was an adult. And so it's different for me. You know, it was very much active choice, and I was aware of what was happening in my body with children. Again, I always say I'm not an advocate for or against medication because I'm not qualified to be. But I do say that, you know, it's very personal, and it's not something that you get a pill and it's magic and it fixes everything. It's one of those things that needs to be done carefully and cautiously and evaluated from time to time to see, is it still appropriate if you're on it? And is it, you know, it's, again, that's a whole realm that I don't do, but yeah.
No, but I'm grateful that we're talking about this too, because I think that's also another thing. Because from my side, I learned it more when it had not because of the ADHD as much, but more because of depression. Because I've had a lot of depressed people, and I
Yeah,
went through depressions as well. I mean, I think that's also when we get overwhelmed from everything. We just, you know,
sure.
it is a form of depression that we get. And so I was looking into that, and I remember because also I, you know, as a coach, I mean, even before I started working as a coach, I did. It's called like an alternative psycho. It's not you know, like not the full psychotherapy. You know, learning psychotherapy to be a psychotherapist, but it's like a smaller version that you're allowed to do in Germany. And I remember when our teacher told us that for people who are depressed, you need some of them, you need to at first build them up before you can start therapy, because you can't,
Yeah.
you know, therapy someone who is down on, you know, who's laying on the floor, because that's just gonna, you know, it's like you will be, you know, hitting them all over again. So you need
Yeah, they're not ready for it. It's like when somebody passes away and they're like, I'm grieving. My mother died 2 weeks ago. And it's like, this is not time for you to
yeah.
go into the deep. If you want to come for some mental health first aid and just to have a place, if you're a private person, you want to have a place to just unload and cry, therapy can be great for that. But to have it be a space of healing trauma in those really tough, oh God, no,
Yeah,
like no.
exactly. And that was so enlightening for me, because and it is, and that's what, like, that's why I love that you just said that, because that's why for some people, some of us just need medication to come out of the slump first, so that
Sure.
we're able to really start working the, you know, start doing the healing. But at first we need to be in our own strength to be able to do that. And just knowing that helped me so much in so many different ways, because you know, you look at everybody different. Like, even, you know, when I'm coaching people as well, I'm looking, is like, are you right now, like, are you really in a state of mind where you're ready to start
Yeah.
to create healing, or are we at, you know, do we need to build you up first right now?
Yeah, the metaphor I like to use with clients is, if you're drowning, it's not the time for me to teach you how to swim. It's time for me to throw you a life preserver. Let's get you so that, you know, you're surviving. We can learn how to swim, and we can realize that because you are drowning, there's a skill deficit that we need to teach you so that you can swim, but not in that moment.
Oh, thank you. That's such a beautiful way to see it. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
thanks.
and thank you so much, because you're like, you know, from what you're telling me, you're one of the first ones, you know, to get into that space. Because I mean, back in 2000, you know, we knew, like you said, we knew the little kids, but because I feel
Yeah.
like today it's normal for us as grown-ups to say, okay, you know, some of us, it's, you know, I found out I have ADHD, and you know, that's okay. But I mean, 23 years ago, that was a whole other
Well,
deal.
and I'll tell you, the psychiatrist who diagnosed me told me this needs to be your secret, because you will never get promoted at work. You will never be given extra responsibility. You won't get hired. Your family's going to look at you different. And at the time, that was good advice. It was true. Not true anymore, thank goodness, hopefully. I mean, there's still some old guard out there that needs to kind of a kick up the backside, but yeah, it's come a long way. And even interventions for adults just didn't exist. We were kind of, you know, making it up as we went along. You know, even the term neurodivergent, I think, is only as old as like 1995, 96, something like that. So it wasn't even in the mainstream yet. So it was, yeah, it was a moment where it's like, you have this dirty little secret about yourself that you need to keep private, but you better figure out how to function in a neurotypical world. So you experience a lot of burnout, and you experience a lot of oversteps, and a lot of, you know, I mean, my joke is that I have foot and mouth disease because I stuck my foot in my mouth so much, just leaning into that impulsivity. Um, But it's amazing the amount of help and support that's there for adults now. And I'm so grateful for it, that other people don't have to experience, the kind of fumbling in the dark that I had to experience.
So what made you decide to, come out, like actually like come out with that diagnosis? Because it's a coming out.
Yeah. Well, I worked with in my first iteration as a professional, I got a specialized training in special education, and I worked with the kids who are called emotionally disturbed, behavior disordered, and at risk for sociopathy. And I'm like, that's lovely labels to put on a 7-year-old, but whatever. And so I was working with neurodivergence anyway. So lots of autism, ADHD, traumatic brain injuries. The kids that the mainstream teachers couldn't handle in the classroom. They were my little guys, and I loved them. And so I worked there for 9 years, and I started to realize that there's not a lot of people out there, and certainly not a lot of women, who are willing to admit what their authenticity is really. And it got to the point where I'm like, I don't want to teach these kids to be ashamed of themselves. Then I started having kids of my own, and all 4 of my kids are neurodivergent. And I'm like, man, this is not a shit. Like, I'm going to just let my freak flag fly, and I'm just going to be me. I will say I have an advantage because of what I do for a living. So I mean, I'm self-employed. I can't discriminate against me, but I just felt like it was time that we started to just take the stigma away from that, because I certainly don't want my girls to feel like it has to be their secret to keep when they go into the professional world.
That's so beautiful. And I mean, to tell you the truth, because that's also one of the things with the empath. For me, I feel that we all have that. It's just that, way back when we didn't have as much input as we have today. Because I mean, today, with internet, with schools, for kids, it's so much input that we're getting all over with, TVs running everywhere, cell phones everywhere. So we have so much information. I think it's the normal process of us humans, and for me, that's what I think, that the neurodivergent part is just, at least that's how I feel, it's just part of our process where we're going through, and that is going to be the future normal. Because I don't know, but like you said, all of your girls are neurodivergent. I hardly know any kids that aren't, because I feel that all of them are either overwhelmed or bored out at school, completely bored out because they don't get stimulated properly with the school system. So I feel that that's actually the new normal we're walking into right now.
Yeah, it's certainly becoming more and more typical. And I'll tell you, one of the big things that happened with that is COVID and lockdown, because I was raised, and in order to survive, I had to wear my mask, and I had to go and pretend to be as quote unquote normal as possible. And, I'd have like people that I would imitate, because I'm like, oh, well, she's got her stuff together and everyone likes her, so I'll just try and be like her. And I'd awkwardly imitate these people who are just not me. But when lockdown happened, we all went home and we got to take the mask off. You get to do that at home. But taking that mask off for an extended period of time, it's really hard to put that back on. And so these kids are going back to school and nothing has changed, but everything has changed. And the expectation that they have to live a life wearing a mask, it's just not as intuitive as it used to be. It's not as like, no, this has to be your secret anymore. And because, education takes time to catch up with that, the level of anxiety in our children right now, and especially our neurodivergent children, is through the roof. Same thing happened with all these people who left work, right? So they go to work, you have to wear your mask, you come home and you just shake and you're just, I'm exhausted from the day. Then they got to work from home and got to take their mask off, and you want me to go and put that back on and be exhausted at the end of the day from what? From managing your emotions? Like, because that's all masking is me trying to manage your emotions. And your expectations, and people don't want to do it anymore. Because there's that discrepancy, there's this awakening, this renaissance of awareness that's like, oh, maybe I am neurodivergent. So everyone's like, oh, it's so trendy to be diagnosed right now. It's like, well, thank God it is. Thank goodness that people finally have an opportunity to have some awareness about themselves that they didn't have before. Because the alternative was sitting there thinking, what the hell is wrong with me? Why can't I keep a tidy house? And I know that seems silly, like keeping a tidy house, because it's not just that my house isn't tidy. It's the rhetoric and the dialogue that I take with that, of constantly self-deprecating myself in 13 voices at a time because my house isn't messy or isn't clean. And it's just people are starting to realize I need support in a different way. And yeah, so that's why all these people are coming out of the woodwork, because they can.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I mean you just took the example of the tidy house, but there's so much more. I mean, not
Oh, yeah.
being planful, not being able to focus on certain things. But to be honest, when we love something, we do focus. So maybe for us to look at what am I focusing on, or maybe to
Yeah.
find the right things to focus on.
The way I describe ADHD, first of all, I say it's the most poorly named diagnosis in the DSM, because I do not lack attention. I have so much attention, I don't know what to do with it. I lack the ability to focus. So I describe it as I'm in a room and there's 9 people talking to me, and I am comfortable in all 9 of those conversations at one time, but I don't necessarily know which one I'm supposed to pay the most attention to at any particular moment. That's where I need help and support. So, I'm supposed to be doing this over here and talking to the person on my left, but the person on my right is really interesting. The person on my left is really boring. So I'm going to listen to the person on my right, even though I still have an awareness that I'm supposed to be talking to the person on my left.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
it's more of like an overabundance of attention.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's when the empath part comes in, because we have
Yeah.
this sensitivity for everything. I mean, like you said, I'm talking to someone and then I feel like, oh, that person over the back, way back there in the room is sort of like starting to get sad or whatever. Oh, I need to go and help, and suddenly we're off track, or we just feel so many things from our surroundings because we have the sensitivity for it, right?
And we feel all 9 of those things. So if I'm only paying
Exactly.
attention to one, then that means I've let down 8 people, and I'm
Exactly.
feeling that, even if they're not, I'm feeling it on their behalf. And one thing that's really difficult about the ADHD profile is something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where you're so sensitive to any form of rejection or letting somebody down. I mean, an example from my life was I was putting together a business and I'd put a lot of money into coaching, things like that. And I had to go do a photo shoot. And I was trying on some clothes for it, and some teenager made a comment about me looking fat. I scrapped the whole business, scrapped the entire business because I couldn't do a photo shoot. I just walked away because I was so devastated for 2 years over one comment that some punk ass kid made, because I'm a chunky lady, and I know I know what my body looks like. I know I'm a larger lady, but something about the way it was said, and because I'm trying to look nice, and I was like, I can't have my picture out online with all those other coaches because they're all skinny and blonde, which isn't true, but in my head they're all skinny and blonde, and they're all these glamorous ladies, and in order to be successful, I'm going to do that, so I'm just going to scrap it, and I did, walked away.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I find is also one gratefully, at least I'm grateful for it, that is changing nowadays, because I mean you still have the model types, in social media walking
Sure.
around. But I feel, and probably like you said, because of this whole new awareness that we all have because of the pandemic we went through, so many people are coming out of the woodwork who are just showing themselves just the way they are. And it's so beautiful. It's so amazing. It's like, oh my God, keep on doing that. Cause we just want, we just want us to be us. Like it's nice if you can, Photoshop a picture, but that's not
Yeah.
the true thing. And the true person and the true energy, as beautiful as it is. But we're letting us, and that's what, like what you said, I remember way back when. Nowadays for me it's changed completely, because I'm like I don't even listen to those kind of, and probably for you as well, right? When if you would get a comment like that today, because you learn to
You say that, and 99% of the time, yeah, but that 1% hits hard and deep.
yeah.
Yeah. So like it's one of those things where comparing myself to other people was a survival skill growing up, because I was smart, right? So why isn't Gwen, I could make the grades fine, but I couldn't shut up in class, and I couldn't, and I dressed myself, my buttons would be unbuttoned funny. My hair was always a mess. I'd pick my nose when I was 10 in front of other people, not realize that was wrong. And so the constant comparison helped me survive. But then it becomes this crutch and this negative coping mechanism, because the comparison doesn't matter anymore. But it's still something that I do so intuitively. It's like breathing. So most of the time I can be like, they'll make a comment about me being overweight, and I'm like, sure am. You don't get this body without working hard at eating, or something like that. But then there's that 1%, and it cuts so deep that I'll cry for a weekend over one comment. And it's visceral. That's the other thing, is it's not just, it makes me feel bad. It makes my body hurt. It makes, from my head to my toes, I am aching in pain from a comment that some person who I don't even know made. It's, as much as I've been doing this work for 25 years, it's still a work. It's still work. It's always work.
No, but I mean, 99% now is better than, more than less when it was before.
Sure.
So and I feel that's the beautiful thing about the process, that we go through all this. And like you said, I think, like, for me, it's the other way around. For me, social media, because I walked into, like, I had very good support surrounding me that was saying, like, you only want people, in your community that like you for who you are. So if someone doesn't like you, just ignore them. So, and somehow that worked for me. But for me, it's my family. Like, there are certain people in my family that if they would say something, about, like, because I come from a, how do you put that? Like, my mom's the oldest of 6 women, so from her side.
All right.
So it's 6 women, yeah, and they were all known for the beauties of that town that they grew up with. Because, I mean, beautiful Asian, Asian Ecuadorian women, and so for them the looks was a lot of things, and not and the weird thing is, my mom, no makeup, she's always been very natural with herself. All the others not. And who do I listen to? All the others. So it's been, it's been my aunts and their stuff. So for so long it was, because I'm more of a, I love to feel comfortable with my clothes. I'm more of a sporty kind of, the way I dress and everything. But I didn't, because I wanted to be like you said, I was copying sort of my aunt. So I needed, high heels, and you need makeup, and it was hurting my back, but I was still doing it, and you're right. I think in my whole process I've gone through, it's been very good with everything else, but they are my 1%.
Yeah. There's always those. And they're the people who love you, and they'd be devastated to know that they hurt you. But man, theirs cuts the deepest.
Yeah.
It's that whole mom thing of, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. But everybody gets that right, Yeah. And I mean, I've learned, both in my therapy training and in my own work, just to kind of acknowledge that rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a part. It's kind of like people who really struggle with anxiety. It's going to be a companion at one point or another in my life. And so rather than fight against it, I just ride that wave. That's why I love your theme so much. I'm like, you just ride that wave, because if you just ride it, then it'll go away. Feelings are just waves in an ocean, and eventually they'll change because they're transient by nature. Yes. But the more resistance I give to those feelings, the longer they hang around.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that I hope that I can, share with everybody, that once you start doing that, once you learn that it's just, let's just let it flow. The less resistance we have, the faster it goes away. And sometimes it just passes. It doesn't even stick. Sometimes it's just, you allow it to happen, and it goes whoosh, and it's gone. Oh, thank you. Nice to have seen you. Oh my God, have I grown? 2 weeks ago, I would have stopped that.
And where's the information? That's the other thing, is that feelings are just feedback. So what's the information I'm getting from that? Do I have some internalized shame about my body? Do I know that I need to eat healthier and exercise more? It's reminding me of that. Do I, where it's understanding that there's a lesson there, and that there's learning in it, really helps to understand why you're feeling what you're feeling. Even jealousy, when you feel jealous, it's like, okay, then feel jealous. It's okay. But what are you trying to tell yourself about that jealousy? What is that jealousy trying to tell you? Where's the learning? Yeah.
Or the anger, like, how much anger do we have that we weren't allowed to feel? Because I mean, hey, you're not supposed to be angry right now, and especially when you start going into a little bit more into the spiritual area. I remember way back when, everything was supposed to be light and love and everything. And but I am angry. No, I'm not allowed to be angry right now. Okay, so I'm pushing that away. That's healthy.
Yeah. I think people read The Secret, and there's so much great learning in The Secret, but they took it and ran with it and didn't realize that the law of attraction is just one law out of 7. Like, there's so many other laws that go around with it. And they're like, if I just think positive, then I'll win the lottery. And it's like,
no,
maybe, I don't know, but like, no. Or if I just think positive, my business is going to work. It's like, yeah, but you do still have to do the work. You do still have to, you can't just sit there and wish and hope, and again, it's not to say I'm not a believer in manifestation or anything like that, but to say that I can just manifest something if I just don't allow a single negative thought, like that's just not true. And it's not human. I don't want to have a negative or an unpleasant emotion and feel guilty and shame on top of that. Can I just have the negative emotion and the uncomfortable feeling and then just not pile on? I'll just have that.
Exactly, and I love that you're saying that, because I think that's actually one of the things that also makes us so, actually sick as humans, because we push them away. We push, all those negative feelings away, but it's part of the human experience to really experience how anger feels, how sadness is another thing we love pushing away. Oh, don't cry. You're not allowed to cry. You're not supposed to cry. Why not? I'm cleansing my body right now to let my tears.
Cortisol comes out through your tears. It's a healthy thing. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that I like to reframe, with my kids and with my clients, and especially myself, is when feelings are negative, it's not the feeling that's negative, it's my experience of that feeling that's negative. So I'm not judging that feeling. I'm just saying, I really don't like this. I'm feeling, sad, and I don't like feeling sad. But sad isn't bad. Sad just is. The negative is my experience, and that'll change when my feeling changes.
I love that. I love that, because it also takes away, that thing, like you said, that judgment. It's a bad thing. No, it's not. It's like you said, it's just is. And the more we learn to live with that, the more we learn to accept it and let it go through us, the faster it goes away. And and I think that's what for a lot of people feels counterintuitive, because you don't want it to happen, but the more you allow it to happen, the faster it will, it just passes.
Yeah. And honestly, sometimes I want to feel sad. If I lose somebody in my life, if I've done something accidentally, but it manifested as a real unkindness to somebody else, I want to feel bad about that to a degree, to learn from it. I want to feel empathy for a person. I want to feel, I want the lessons that come with those feelings. I don't need to have those lessons and feel guilt and shame that I have to heal later on. In fact, I had a therapist say to me one time, because I was feeling guilty about something I did by my impulsivity is a huge issue for me, and I can't even remember what it was, but she was like, so do you want to fix this, or do you want to feel guilt and shame and then fix this? Because you can do either way. And I was like, oh. All right, then I'll just fix this.
I know. And also, like you said, it's something that we do to ourselves. We do it to ourselves. We are the ones that judge us the worst, right?
Yeah. Well, and I realized at one point too that so as an empath, you're feeling other people's emotions, right? And that's just a natural part of it. I can tell what you're feeling, and I can feel it in my body. I can feel it in my heart. But even if I'm feeling it with you, you're still feeling it. And if I try and take that away from you, that's quite unkind, because I'm robbing you of your lessons. I'm this massive ego control for I'll feel all the sadness for the world. It's like, no, they're still feeling sad. You're just feeling it too. And they should have the right to their lessons and their feelings. So I can sit instead and just experience it, and then let you take your lessons and your learning and your feelings with you, and just kind of act more as like an emotional container for a minute. But then you can empty the container and go out the door and have your lessons in life.
I love how you're showing it, because this is also one of the very first things that I tell my clients as well. And because I remember way back when, because I did therapy as well when I had this depression part, and I remember my therapist telling me, "Who made you in charge of everybody else's feelings? Who made you the responsible one?" And that was like, wait, I don't have to be responsible. But if I do this, then if I don't do this, then they're gonna be sad. Yeah, maybe they need it, like you said, and it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's so important for us to learn that act, because we don't like when people are too emotionally or energetically overbearing. We don't like it when people come in and take in their space, at our space, and want to take over and want to tell us how we're supposed to do things. But we're doing it with everybody.
Machiavellian. We're like ninja doing it, going in there and being like, I shall sneakily not allow you to be sad. I see this with parents a lot, actually, especially parents of neurodivergent children. There's a new parenting type. So you've heard of like the tiger mom and the helicopter mom, where it's the snowplow parent, where this parent is just going to remove every obstacle out of the way of their children so they live a life that's obstacle free. And I like to call that job security, because they all come to me as adults not knowing how to deal with obstacles in their lives. I'm like, no, I want my kids to have obstacles. I want my kids to have all of the negative things, especially while they're home, and I can teach them coping mechanisms, and I can let them know they're okay. And I can help them, find different resources within themselves to solve their own problems, as opposed to saying, don't worry, mommy's got it.
Exactly. And sorry, it's like similar. I always tell them, if you would carry your child all the way, all the time, your child would never learn to walk. So what are you doing with someone else's feelings? Exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful. No, and it's necessary for us to understand that. One of the things, because I read, I don't know if you heard maybe that episode where I already said it, because I keep forgetting which book it was. But in one of the empaths book that I read recently, one of the authors actually compared that narcissists are actually empaths gone bad.
Well, and that's the funny thing. I have a family member who's actually a diagnosed narcissist, and our personalities are actually pretty similar. The difference is this family member manipulates people for their benefit. And I don't, but I know I could. Like, I know, so with my intellect and study, I see how that works. And I can see how I could do that if I wanted to. Because when you are so attuned to other people's feelings, especially people who aren't necessarily attuned to their own feelings, you can play them like a puppet if you want to.
Yeah. Exactly.
You could.
I know, no, exactly. And that's why I was just mentioning it, because when we try to, help someone else's emotions, we're actually sort of doing it in that moment, because we're taking away their, like you said, their experience with that emotion just because we want them to be happy. And then we're sort of doing that negative side of being an empath.
Yeah, because it's about me wanting to be happy. It's not about them learning anything in their life. It's like the drama triangle. I always explain is like you have the victim, the princess in the tower, who's going, "Oh, help me!" And then you have the knight going, "Da da da, I'll save you," who's the rescuer. And then you have like the dragon or the evil wizard or whatever that's keeping the princess there. And all three of those things are unhealthy. I don't want to be helpless up in the tower. Someone rescue you. It's like, walk down the stairs, girl. Like, you're fine. You got legs. You got hair. Tie it up. Go down, And just that night, that idea of like, oh, this poor, pitiful woman, I shall be the rescuer. I shall be the savior. But it's because I want to feel good. It's because it makes me feel good to be a rescuer. It has nothing to do with the person being rescued. It's really easy to blame that persecutor, that witch or that dragon. That's easy because they're, being outwardly nasty. But the disempowerment that comes from being a rescuer, man, it's like, that's pretty selfish.
I love it. See how we resonate. Now I know why you had to come on my podcast.
I did know. I saw you. I was like, oh,
yes. Because this is like, oh my God, you're taking the words out of my mouth. Because this is exactly what I tell them. It's actually when we have this helping syndrome that we need to help and rescue everybody, it's actually selfish, because the only reason we're doing it is because we don't want to bear their negative energy. So we save them so that we don't have that anymore. Oh,
my kids had go to work with mom day yesterday, and I had a friend who's a coach who did a coaching session with me consensually with my kids in there, and so the kids could just kind of see what I did. And at the end of the call, the kids were like, "Well, why didn't you just tell her to do this? Or why didn't you just tell her to do this?" And I was like, "That's not what I do, babe. Like, because I could tell her to make this decision, but then I just go out and I live my happy little life, and I don't have to deal with the consequences. I could tell somebody to get divorced. I could tell somebody to go change their career. I could tell somebody to sell their house and move to Spain, but I don't have to live with the consequences of that choice." And then they're still leaving without having any sort of control in their life. They're just giving the control to me instead.
Yeah.
And I don't want that responsibility.
I was going to say, we've had enough fake responsibility. That's so beautiful. But that's exactly how it is. And there are so many, people out there that feel like, and I do understand, because I mean, even the non-empathic, rescuers, they all just want the best for you, but still sometimes you just need to go through the motions. You just,
Well, maybe my idea about what's best for you isn't best for you.
exactly.
It's what I think is best is putting my stuff on you, and that's not fair.
Exactly. Thank you. That's another thing that I also tell my clients as well, because sometimes I feel like, because empaths say that, I feel your feelings, so I know what you're feeling and I know what's best for you. But the thing is that even we do feel the energy, but
Mhm.
it still goes through our own filters, right? I mean, there's
Right.
still my own stories, the things that I live through, that when I feel that energy from that other person, it's still going to go through my own filter. It's never going to come, fully clean through and like, no, I'm the enlightened. No, every empath has their own filter too.
Yeah, and there's also, if you're not careful, there's the assumption of trauma. So as an a high needs ADHD woman, there was a lot of educational trauma that happened with me. Like I wrote a blog post about it where my first grade teacher used to tape me to my desk because I kept getting up and moving around, and I'd have to go to recess late because she'd have to move the tape so I could go. And we found my first grade report card that said, Gwen's just lazy. She doesn't even care. Wrote that down in my permanent record, and that rhetoric followed me all through school. My favorite one, that's just like the weapon words of choice for me, where she's not meeting her potential, whatever the hell that means. And so I went through significant amount of educational trauma. Everybody didn't. A lot of us did. A lot of us did. And honestly, from well-meaning people, kind of like microaggressions, where it's like well-meaning people trying to make you do what you're supposed to do, but not understanding what your needs were. And so I'd say probably 90% of us did. But that 10%, if I assume that trauma on them and make them redefine what was a healthy experience for them through a traumatic lens, that's not fair.
Yeah.
That's not right, to the assumption of trauma.
Yeah, no, and then trauma is all, they're even within the whole trauma circle, the 90% don't have the same kind of trauma as
Sure.
well, right?
Yeah.
So might be thinking that this trauma comes from this, but it might be something completely different that I don't know because I don't know the full story.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, neither do they. I don't know the full story of what happened when I was 6, because I had a 6-year-old's brain when I was experiencing it. I probably was an obnoxious kid to have in the classroom. I probably was, because I was a know-it-all. I was a talker. I was, I was the me, I was the queen of the pick-me girls, like, but but my experience of it is still valid. My experience of it is what it was, and needed some healing, and needed some space and some air. So it doesn't matter what actually happened in that room, and it doesn't matter what my teacher's intentions were. She's probably dead by now, and so like the important thing was my experience. So my experience is what I brought to my therapy room to be able to cope with.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard when you work with neurodivergence too, because you can't work in a strict coaching or a strict therapeutic model, because so much psychoeducation needs to happen. So if I don't tell you what rejection sensitivity dysphoria is, you're never going to know what that is.
Right.
You're not. So it's about saying, let me give you some information here. Let me tell you about this big concept. How do you think that applies to you? So pulling out the mentoring and the psychoeducation as part of what you do really helps people move forward, but still in their own story, in their own life.
Yes. Oh, I love that you're saying that, and that you're supporting in that way too, because I feel it changes so much once we realize, like having that, hey, if someone rejects me, it does, like even if it's someone that I don't know, it's still going to hurt me in so many ways. So why
Yeah.
not try to heal the trauma that is behind all that, so that you can, come out of it, because it just helps to pinpoint. Because I'm not a big fan of labels, because I feel, we sometimes we need them to understand certain things, but sometimes they also are very,
Yeah.
um uh yeah, like holding us
Restrictive.
back,
Yeah.
or like, oh, now I have this label, and now I, like that I have to live with this right now.
Yeah.
but but I feel that sometimes it's just helpful to know, like you said, having the diagnosis, even though you had to, even though you had to hide it at the beginning for yourself, but just knowing that it's like, oh, now I
Yeah.
understand, now I understand myself better. It doesn't mean that that you have to be in that, but it just helps you understand so much. And like you said, when we get to know that there's this dysphoria, when we just know, it helps us understand, and then we can start, working with it instead of feeling like, oh
Yeah.
my God, what's wrong with me?
Well, it's understanding that shows it different for different people. So, for example, people with testosterone running through their veins will experience RSD as aggression and anger. So they will have huge road rage, for example. Someone cut me off, and it will be the rest of they might even chase that person down because that testosterone's fueling them, and they're driving with that anger, and and so it gets experienced in so many different ways. So it's not like RSD is you feel bad and you walk away from your business. That's how I experienced it. It was about 8, 9, no, probably more, probably 10 years ago. That's how I experienced, had no idea what I was experiencing at the time, but through pulling it apart, realized that's what it was. But it's just a thing, like an umbrella term that you can use or not use if it applies to you.
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm saying. And the beauty about it is it helps you understand, but you don't have to, you don't have to, because I feel like sometimes we use certain terms to be comfortable in being the victim of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But we don't have to be victims of any labels in our lives. For
No, it's
everything,
my
there's a
brain is
solution.
different, and that's so normal.
Exactly.
It's kind of like people say, oh, you're ADHD, you must be late all the time. And I'm like, actually, no. I have a very visceral, like I could tell you that we're probably about 40, 45 minutes into this conversation without looking at a clock, because I feel the passage of time very, very viscerally, to the point that I'm uncomfortable if I'm late. Like I'm obnoxiously early to everything because I can't be late. I can't do it. And like even in Zoom calls, somebody will show up for a Zoom call for a seminar that I'm giving, but you have that 2-minute Zoom window where everybody has to wait. And I hate that. I'm like, it's at 12 o'clock. So like, but I have to kind of be okay with that because my association with time is very, very intuitive. So, when people say, oh, I must be ADHD, I get late sometimes. I'm like, that doesn't mean you're ADHD.
No.
Nobody ever says, oh, I must be ADHD because I was able to hyperfocus and do a whole week's worth of work in 6 hours. You're using it as an insult for yourself. So it's like, let's take a step back from that and say that there's a great side and a shadow side to my neurodivergence, but it's also the whole point of being neurodivergent is that it's unique. It's unique to me. It just fits under this umbrella.
Yes, and it's so beautiful. That's so beautiful about it because we can all be unique but still be together.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty about it. Oh,
Yeah.
this is so beautiful, Gwendolyn. One question for like if someone says, "Oh my God, Gwendolyn, you sound so amazing, and I think I'm neurodivergent, and I think I need help." How do you offer your help?
Well,
Like,
I do coaching. I do, in fact, a lot of my work is people who realize they're neurodivergent when their children become diagnosed. Well, they'll say like, well, he can't be autistic. He's just like me. And I go, and they're like, oh, yeah. So my favorite population to work with right now is the neurodivergent adult who's coming into their awareness of it, because there's so many of us. So my website is So Not Typical, because we are so not typical in our lifestyles, in our life experience, in the way we show up in the world. And so I have a 12-week coaching program. I have power hours that I do. But man, just shoot me a message. LinkedIn is probably where I am the most. I'm trying to show up on TikTok more because I love to talk. And then I have an Instagram with, I think, 4 posts on it because you're supposed to, but that's not my So, but go to sonottypical.com, and I'd love to offer help and support, even if it's just a 20-minute chat to say, hey, what's happening in your world? Let's see if we can work together.
Yeah, or just to understand yourself a little bit better.
Yeah.
Oh, my beautifuls, everybody, we're going to put all the links below so you can just go check out the show notes or the description of the YouTube video, and you'll find all the links. This is so beautiful. Thank you so much. I love how how you were sort of like taking my words, my thoughts. It's incredible. I love it so much. I love the work that you do. I think it's so important. And thank you for being pioneer, with this, because I feel like, of course, nowadays we talk more about it, but like you say, you're one of the first grown-ups that was diagnosed with something like this, and having to go through with that it probably was very lonely back then, but it's so beautiful that now you create this space for everybody not to feel lonely. So thank you so much from everybody, from all the neurodivergents, for this. This is really amazing.
Well, that touches my heart. And empath to empath, I hope you feel it back.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Do you have like one last thing that you want to, like, whatever comes up that you want to tell our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, just to say that in order to be neurodivergent, you don't have to have a diagnosis. And a lot of people don't get that. Like, we don't have membership cards. You're welcome to acknowledge that your brain is different without having some doctor co-sign it. There's positives and negatives to getting a diagnosis, and that's entirely up to you. But if you feel like your brain is different, you don't have to wait for a diagnosis for intervention, whether it's coming to work with me, just reading a book, going to someone else, getting a blog post, figuring out what executive functioning is and how that shows up for you. Start figuring out what it is that you need, so that you can move forward. Because in the neurodivergent world, a lot of us are coping, but that doesn't need to be our benchmark. We have a right to thrive too. It just is going to look a little bit not typical.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, for being part of my podcast. And thank you to everybody who was listening in. I hope you enjoyed today's Soul Talk and have a wonderful time. And as always, serve your energy wave.
I love that.
Bye, everybody.